Hello everybody, welcome to Good Employment Chatter. Today we're going to be talking about inclusion, another of the topics that links to our Good Employment Charter Awards, and we're hoping that the conversation today might encourage some of you to put some nominations in for our awards event. Today I'm joined by Dr. Christopher Owen, who many of you may have heard of, currently working at Manchester Pride and leading on the All Equals Charter. But Christopher is kind of very familiar with the Charter, is a member of our technical panel, and so has the pleasure of looking at a lot of our assessments for employees that are working towards membership. And we really value the contributions that he makes, because we certainly learn a great deal from those conversations that we have, and they're always very interesting. So welcome, Christopher. It's absolutely brilliant to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Carol. It's really lovely to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation with you. And I know it's going to be an interesting conversation because there's lots of interesting experiences that you've had along the way. And I'm also thinking about some of the conversations that take place during the technical panel. And I know that your insights on inclusion are really interesting and thought-provoking as well. And I'm hoping that a lot of our listeners will take something from that as well that they can apply in their workplace. So I'm just going to try and first of all, just kind of start the conversation by just talking to you a little bit about your kind of career and what shapes your perspectives really around inclusion. And I know that you care passionately about having the right culture within organisations and the right leadership. So what things have kind of touched on your life and kind of brought you towards the thoughts that you have now around inclusion?
So I grew up in a very small farming village in Canada, and I didn't know any queer people. I didn't even know queer was an option. Didn't know it existed. It wasn't taught to me in school, but I also never saw or met any queer people. And so, as I entered into my adulthood and started working for the first time, it became really important to me to understand. Well, why? Why didn't I even know that this was an option? Why didn't I know that this existed?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just about homophobia. In fact, it wasn't really about hate. It was about erasure. Mm-hmm. It was about the lack of representation, sure, in terms of diversity, but also in terms of the way that we think, the way that we, the option, people would say to me, oh, do you have a girlfriend? And that question wasn't homophobic or hateful, but the option of having a boyfriend wasn't even on the table, right? That systemic side of erasure was really impactful for me and really influenced my childhood and my adolescence. So as an adult, I became really interested in the invisible ways that society is structured to hurt marginalized communities. The obvious bigotry stuff is interesting, but the subtle mechanics of how an organization might run or how an institution their policies might be exclusive or whatever was really where my passion started, I guess.
Yeah.
So I ended up going for a full PhD. I got a PhD in intersectional systemic oppression, primarily through frameworks of Black feminism. And I'm really informed by Black feminist movements and the work that's done in that space. Abolitionism and that kind of work is really important to me. I read a lot of the work of Patricia Hill Collins and the Matrix of Domination and the ways that institutions and bureaucracies are structured in ways that create ease or difficulty for different groups of people to access different types of opportunities. A really easy example to make that a little bit more concrete for people would be the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
Right? And women not being promoted or not getting executive leadership positions because of that glass ceiling. That's a way that institutions and organizations are structured to limit opportunities for women. For women of color, we often call this the concrete ceiling because it's even harder to get through.
Yeah, interesting.
Right? So that kind of thing I find really fascinating. And the original plan was to become an academic, to teach in universities, to work with students, and be a researcher. But in the end of my PhD, and I'm talking 2 months before graduation, I went to a big international conference, and there were loads of scholars there who studied different areas of oppression, but they only really wanted to talk about it. And when I would push to like action and making change, doing something, they'd get really defensive and really mad. And I had a room full of people yelling at me at one point because I had challenged like one of the speakers because I didn't feel like their arguments were going to result in any change. And so I challenged them and be like, well, what about this and what about this? And the whole room attacked me. And I was like, oh, like, this is not a room of people invested in social change making. This is a room full of people invested in thinking about things and talking about things. And we need people to think about these things and talk about these things. But then we need to move that conversation out of that echo chamber space and into the spaces of people who are going to do the work. And so I left academia. And I know that I have a lot of like educational privilege. My understanding of inclusion, exclusion, erasure, opportunity, all of those things are deeper than most because I've dedicated like a decade to researching these things. And I want to use that privilege to help people implement meaningful change. So my career really I've been working in the LGBTQ+ sector for about a decade. I did a bit during my studies. And then in Manchester, I was a youth worker for a bit. I ended up delivering a lot of like training and workshops and consultations for public sector and charity sector professionals and youth worker professionals in that space. I ended up writing a book on, it's titled Visible Justice. It's an inclusivity handbook specifically around LGBTQ+ inclusion. And all of the profits for that go towards local queer youth. So please go buy Visible Justice. I won't see a penny, but it's good work for supporting the young people and has lots of ideas for improving inclusion for LGBTQ+ people. And then I started at Manchester Pride roughly 4 years ago, delivering the All Equals Charter. So the All Equals Charter works with businesses and organizations to support them on their inclusion journey, to meaningfully support. Yes, it's got an LGBTQ+ focus because it's from Manchester Pride. But it's inherently intersectional. So we're thinking about all communities. There's an accreditation scheme so we can assess businesses and see, and organizations, we're cross-sector. So we can assess groups and see how good they're doing and then let them know and then give them feedback and help them develop improvements. But we also can support organizations who are just getting started on that journey and get that ball rolling for the first time. So there's loads of programs there. And now, very recently, I'm leaving Pride. I know, but you're still going to stay on our technical panel. I am. Thank you for keeping me. That's really, really lovely. But yes, I'm starting up my own consultancy now, which I'm amazing. Really excited about. So it's called Coliberate. Coliberation is the theory that nobody can be free unless everybody's free. That systems of oppression are all interconnected. So, for example, patriarchy and the mistreatment of women, like that glass ceiling that we were talking about. Well, the way that we've shaped gender roles, gender norms, limitations on women is rooted in histories of colonialism and racism and heteronormativity and all of these other systems of oppression. So you can't dismantle patriarchy and achieve the ultimate goals of feminism unless you're also anti-racist, unless you're also, anti-homophobia and all of these things. So
they all link together, don't they?
They all link together. So rather than thinking of these as lots of different movements, and they are lots of different movements, let's make it one movement. And let's all work together. And let's support one another. And so Coliberate, yes, there's organizational consulting, absolutely. But I also deliver talks, workshops, training. And my real favorite is delivering coaching for both individuals and groups and just helping people work with all of the assets that they have, the skills, their passions, the resources, to make the most meaningful change that they can. I meet so many people who feel really helpless or really hopeless about the state of the world, whether that be rising racism or the cost of living crisis or the climate change or whatever, and they feel like there's nothing that they can do about it, and they're just miserable. And Coliberate's mission is to help them feel empowered and liberated. Go figure.
And to take some action.
Take some real action and meaningful action that will actually make a difference.
So over your kind of career and the experiences that you've had, you've obviously seen lots of change. And I think you're right about that kind of like institutionalization and infrastructures and systems that they do feel like real barriers for change, don't they? And it's so difficult when things have been in place for such a long time. People feel frightened of change. But have you seen that change is happening? And the world is changing rapidly. The world of work has changed significantly since the pandemic alone. but it does feel like attitudes are starting to change and conversations are moving on. So now that you're speaking to other people, do you feel that there is a desire now, an increased desire from people to start to make some of those significant changes that are required?
Oh, absolutely. I think no matter where people sit on the political spectrum right now, everybody's in agreement. We need something different.
Yeah.
This isn't working, right? And I think that's why we're seeing like the rise of the alt-right is because communities are suffering and they want something different. And maybe they're misplacing their trust. That's up to other people to decide. I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I do think that people need something different, and that might be that you are leaning more hard right or more hard left, and I think we're seeing a little bit less of that middle ground lately in my experience. When I talk to inclusion professionals or people who are social justice activists or community organizers in that space, the conversation has definitely shifted to, okay, but what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And what's going to make a difference? People are done with tick box exercises. People want the authenticity.
Yeah.
They want to see measurable outcomes, though. Right? They want to be able to track it and measure it and say, this is the work we did, and these are the outcomes, and they mattered because, and really, really feel like they made a difference.
Yeah, and I think as well, I've noticed that when we, like for example, when we have our technical panel meetings and when we have the conversations with employers, there's that shift in the language as well now from not just talk about inclusion, but that intersectionality and about people recognizing that things are much broader and everything links together. And you're always quite passionate about people recognizing intersectionality. So how could you define that for an employer that's kind of trying to get their head around the differences and trying to move their organization forward? How do they start to create a workforce or an organization that does recognize that intersectionality?
Yeah. So there's two different approaches to intersectionality, and I think this is why people get tripped up, because people will say the same word and mean different things.
Yeah.
So the first approach to intersectionality, and to be clear, like to define the term, it comes from like a road intersection. So you can think about one road being, say, race, and another road being gender, right? And then women of color are standing right in the middle of that road. And do picture it, actually visualize it in your mind. You're standing in the middle of an intersection. If somebody said to you, what road are you on? You'd have to say both. You couldn't say one or the other, right? Right in that middle of that intersection, not on the corner, in the intersection.
In the middle,
and so that's what intersectionality, the metaphor means. So the first way of thinking about it would be the race road, the gender road, and then who that person is in the middle.
Yeah.
So women of color. So in intersectional inclusion in workplaces, you might look at your diversity statistics, for example, and you might say, okay, we've got X percentage of Black people, X percentage of Asian people, X percentage of disabled people, X percentage of trans, whatever, right? And you'd go through it.
Yeah.
Intersectional inclusion would think about, all right, well, where does that overlap? So you might have, two senior executives that are of the global majority, but are they both men, right? Have you broken that concrete ceiling for women of color? And really thinking about that as like a way of like representation and supporting multiple different groups. And so that's like a really important thing. I see it a lot in LGBTQ plus spaces. They'll be like, we've got great LGBTQ plus representation. And then it's a bunch of white gay men. Lovely, great. But like, where are the lesbians? Where are the queer women? Where are the queer trans people? Like, where are the trans people? Where are the queer people of color? And so on and so forth. So that's really important to support the entire community.
Yeah. And you're right, because people don't just fit into one box, do they?
No.
Like you said, it's not a tick box exercise.
That's right.
And I think we have moved away now, haven't we? Now thinking that we all fit in one box. And that's really important, isn't it? To kind of make sure that everybody does feel included.
Yeah.
So it kind of links in as well with that feeling of making everybody feel safe. And we've talked before about that psychological safety as well, and about how do you make everybody feel safe and accepted when they come to work as well. and recognizing the differences that we all have.
Yeah, and I think that actually is a really great segue into the second type of intersectionality, which is about experiences. So instead of a race road and a gender road, you'll have a racism road and a misogyny road, right? And then the unique experiences of women of color, right? So women of color will experience forms of oppression that men from the global majority don't experience, and that white women don't experience, right? It's unique to being a woman of color. And so, and I'm using those as examples. You could do gay, disabled people. You could do neurodiverse, trans people. Like, there's loads and loads of intersections, right? But those unique experiences have extraordinary overlap. So when we're looking at making sure people feel safe, the things that tend to make queer people feel unsafe and people of color, like people of the global majority feel unsafe and women feel unsafe, tend to really overlap, right? And so that intersectional inclusion piece now, if you're only worried about how historically privileged groups, who are the safest groups, how they can feel safe, you're going to have huge gaps in your workplace culture and in your measures for protecting your staff. And it's going to impact things like retention. It's going to impact things like productivity. It's going to increase absenteeism and conflict within the workplace. So, like, making sure that everybody feels safe. Actually, you want to pull from the communities who have historically been the least safe, because they're going to know what they need much, much better.
Yeah. So in terms of, kind of that inclusion and making everybody feel safe, how can employers try to draw out those lived experiences from individuals? Because those lived experiences are so rich and we learn a lot from them. And it does feel like people are wanting to be more open nowadays. I guess things like kind of the social media platforms are also a vehicle to allow people to do that as well. So how can an employer encourage people to be open and talk about those lived experiences so that others can benefit from them? Do they need to create a certain type of environment to enable that to happen? Yeah,
so I think actually the first question is to really question whether your own employees are the right people to ask.
Yeah.
That's a big piece of emotional labor that isn't in their job description. So that's a first question, I think. And if you are using your employees to help inform your own workplace culture and your own practices, are you properly compensating those employees? Are you giving them the time to do that? Are you giving them proper pay for it? Whatever it might be. So that's a first consideration, I think.
Yeah.
A second consideration might be to look at external experts, or even just like paying attention to what movements are saying. So you don't have to, let's say you don't have to be a member of Black Lives Matter. You don't even have to necessarily agree with everything Black Lives Matter has to say. But you probably need to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter are probably experts in protecting and keeping Black communities safe.
Yeah.
Like, that's like their whole thing. So what are they saying about it? What are they doing? What are they, like, when they say abolish the police, that's a big radical statement. You don't have to agree with that position, but what are they recommending instead then? Because they do have recommendations. So read it, have a look. And you might disagree with it entirely, but it might inspire some new innovative approaches. It might really like inform you. Like movements exist to change minds, to change those institutional practices, to change the status quo. And I think if you want to make sure your people feel safe, you need to like be listening to the larger conversation as well.
Yeah.
And there's loads that you can do. Yes, you can get it from your own employees, but I think psychological safety needs to be a key priority. Not treating them like the voice box of their entire community is going to be really important. Like, don't tokenize them.
Yeah.
Those are really important things. One of the things that you can really do is really like, if you're going to listen to your staff, listen to them. And I know that sounds stupid, but like, the number of times that marginalized people will be like asked for advice and be put in a position where they have to like share like difficult lived experiences or anything else, and then senior leadership will go, okay, cool, that's interesting, thanks, and then do nothing about it.
It's about acknowledging it, isn't it, and then doing something with that information and making them feel that they've actually made a valuable contribution. It's going to make a difference as well.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Make sure your staff feel valued. Like actually valued.
Yeah, absolutely. So for employers that are kind of keen to diversify their workforce and be more inclusive, often some of it is about how they project themselves as well. So things like their website and how that appears to people that are looking at it from an external audience. We know that a lot of young people now are quite keen to see the values that an employer has. They're quite keen to see that they might fit into an organisation as well. So they're key things as well, aren't they, that employers should be thinking about that projection and getting the message out there as well as internally within their organisation.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna say something that might frustrate people. If you want to project that you're an inclusive employer, prove it.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, it's actually not complicated. It's actually really, really straightforward. You want to attract diverse talent.
Yeah.
You want to have you want to have a reputation for being good people who do good things and add value to your community. Then go do good things and go add value to your community.
Yeah.
And then talk about the good things you've already done. One of the mistakes that I think organizations make is they do these things in the wrong order. They want to have diverse staff, so they hire a bunch of diverse staff. And then those staff are really unhappy, they're really mistreated, they end up all leaving, and no change is made, right? Instead, start by putting on a campaign, by starting a new initiative. Go mentor some disenfranchised youth. Go create a fundraising scheme to support services in your neighborhood, whatever it might be, but go do something that matters to your community, and then talk about what you did.
Yeah.
And people will see that you're not all talk, and the right diverse talent will come to you because their values will align with yours.
Yes.
And they'll come in knowing that you're good people. But not only that, but your core team that you currently have, if they've gone off and done a mentorship program with disenfranchised young people, for example, then they'll have had experience working with people from other cultures and communities. And so they won't meet their new diverse colleagues and be completely out of their depth, right? They'll be like, oh, I've talked to a brown person before. It's not new for me, right? And now that new employee coming in is welcomed in and treated like an equal and treated with respect. And we don't have to overcomplicate how to treat humans like humans.
Yeah. And there are obvious business benefits, aren't there, that employers, will gain by having a diverse workforce as well,
absolutely.
won't they? And I guess some of those will be about, the kind of new ideas that will be brought into an organisation and looking at different approaches. Are there other key things that you have observed that might change in an organisation or makes a diverse organisation stand out from one that isn't diverse?
I think people do better when they're treated with respect.
Yeah.
It's why my consultancy is focused on liberation, and why I've called it Coliberate, because people want to feel free. They want to feel like things are fair. They want to feel valued. They want to feel liberated.
Yeah.
And when they do feel liberated, whether that be liberated from oppression or liberated from a micromanaging boss or whatever it is, liberated from, the fear of climate change, whatever that might be, they are happy to come to work. They show up on time. They work hard. They're excited to be there. And then from there, they're being innovative. They're thinking more creatively. They're working collaboratively with one another. If you want to see benefits, create a culture of joy.
Yeah.
People should want to be around you. And if people hate coming to work or they don't like it, then you're not going to get results.
No.
People are going to do the bare minimum, right?
That's right. And you spend so much of your time at work that if you can make it as an enjoyable experience as possible, then that's the benefit of both the employer and the employee, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so, absolutely. You can't have a liberated workforce if your values aren't aligned with inclusion and equity and diversity. Right now, there's a big pushback against workplace inclusion initiatives.
Yes.
And my response to that is, well, what's the outcome you want, right? Is the outcome that you want, to say you've ticked that EDI box, or is the outcome that you want is that your community is thriving and your organization is adding a huge amount of value to your community and your staff feel are just thriving? Because if those are your priorities, then you're going to end up doing EDI anyway.
Yeah.
You're going to just end up doing it.
Yeah. We also recognise that at the moment, we've kind of talked about the fact that there's, I think, potentially 5 generations within a workforce at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I guess each generation has been impacted or influenced by kind of certain things in their own lifetime. Do you see differences in approach between different generations around diversity and inclusion? And what are kind of some of the key differences? And are there any tips on how an employer can, adapt their message to those different kind of audiences?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting because it's also intersectional.
Yeah.
So I will meet, I'll meet some people who are in their later in their career, mm-hmm. and they'll say things like, "Oh, this is all just very new for me," or "We didn't have this before." "Oh, this doesn't matter." I'll get that as well. But then I'll also get people at that exact same age who were part of the civil rights movement, or who were hippies, or right, and they're like, "We've always been fighting for these things, right? What are you talking about?" The majority of climate activists I know are over the age of 50. Mm-hmm. This idea that people of an older demographic aren't interested in these issues, and it's just not true. It's just not. And similarly, the majority of hate crimes, the majority of white supremacists right now are young men, right? And so there's this misconception that older generations are the least likely to support workplace inclusion or any kind of social change making, environmental change making work. It's just not true. Mm-hmm. And the odd exception when I face somebody and they go, "Oh, this is all new for me," I'm like, well, it's not new for your peers. It shouldn't be new for you. Yeah. We've had civil rights, pretty good rights for people of the global majority for 60 years now in this country. It's not new. So I think that's really important for people to clock, but also to not get complacent and think oh, the young people, they figured this out. It's not true. And the young people of all generations need to be yes, held accountable, maybe challenged a bit, but also because people feel so helpless and hopeless, they put their faith in the wrong space. Yeah. And so it's about, the people, the young men who are big fans of Joe Rogan and Andrew Tate and these really right-wing hateful bigots. How do we redirect those frustrations that need to feel valued, that need to feel seen, into something that actually supports the community? Yeah. And so often people are resistant to these things, not on a generational level, but on a personal human level of, I don't feel seen, I don't feel valued, I feel threatened. And so going back to safety, how do we make sure that people feel safe and they don't feel threatened? And this is really important for people who are resistant to inclusion. Regularly, it's because they feel threatened by it. Yeah. And they shouldn't. There's no threat to you. No. So why do you feel threatened? Where does that come from? And how can we make you feel more secure and actually make you feel like you're a part of it, and you're involved in it and you matter? And again, that's a big approach to co-liberation, is white people benefit from the dismantling of racism. Men benefit from the dismantling of patriarchy. Helping people see that, helping people be involved in that is really necessary for everybody to feel safe and included, and for everybody to thrive.
So what steps could an employer take to create that kind of breaking down of some of those barriers? Because that might feel quite scary to some, thinking, how do I get some of these people that are resistant to come along this journey and to make, to open their minds? How can you start to break down those walls and start to make small steps? Are there any tips that you could give some of our employers around that?
100%. Tip number 1, hire me. No, I jest. But I think I all of the research that I have done to break down those barriers, you do it through meaningful relationships. So
and gain trust.
trust. So figure out who in your team has inclusive values and who doesn't, right? And allow, and maybe it's about facilitating workshops or spaces where people feel safe to place themselves on a spectrum there. And then you have different education pieces at that point. So for those who have inclusive values, the education piece is on skills. Skills in having difficult conversations, skills in being inclusive, right? Like all of that. For people who are not interested in inclusion and diversity and equity, the education piece is around, well, why? What are you afraid of? What are you angry about? Are you blaming the wrong people for your problems? Probably, right? It's not immigrants' fault you can't get a house. Like, that's silly. So helping people with those kinds of things, and a big education piece. Because a lot of the time, inclusion education, all it does is say, well, this is what the law says. You'll get in trouble if you don't follow the law. And then if you add unconscious bias training to it, it's saying, you're probably going to break the law and you're probably going to get in trouble. All that does is make people defensive and get people's walls up, and it doesn't help anything. But if we dive into, okay, here's the why. Here's why inclusion is important, and here's where we're going. This is the outcome we want to see. So let's all work together towards achieving these outcomes. And the outcomes aren't statistics around diversity. The outcomes are around the well-being of your community, how well your staff are thriving, that historic structures of colonialism or racism or patriarchy no longer exist in your workplace, right? An outcome would be that women are listened to in boardrooms. That's an outcome, right? So how do we achieve that outcome? Well, it means that maybe your male staff need to go on some active listening courses, right? And then they know why they're doing it as well. It's not that they're being told off, it's that they're part of a team.
Yeah, and making things better.
For everybody, absolutely. And you want to be part of the solution, right? You want to feel like you're contributing something of value. So rather than penalizing people and making them go on inclusion training as some sort of punishment, bring them along on that journey with you. And then also what you can do is, now that you've got a team that's either getting that education piece into the why and the where we're going, and another part of your team that's getting those skills, buddy them up.
Yeah.
And start building relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Because when you build those relationships, somebody can go, oh, I don't understand pronouns and I'm mad about trans people. And then their buddy can go, oh, why? Right? Yeah. And talk to me about that. Why are you mad about pronouns? Where does that come from? And it doesn't really come from anywhere. And once you start talking about it and you ask in a gentle way, and you're not telling them off, you're not calling them out, you're not canceling them, you're just working through it with them. It's called actively processing your values. And if you believe in fairness and kindness and love, which most people do, we all should do, then you probably will come to identify for yourself that your exclusionary behaviors don't align with your own values, and you need to change your behavior. And you can't tell people what to do. Nobody likes being told what to do or what to think.
No, they sometimes turn back then, don't they? They kind of resist it. They're being told what they have to do.
They actually double down historically.
Yeah.
So don't tell people what to do or what to think, but help them identify what their own values are, and they'll make that decision for themselves.
Yeah. You obviously see lots of organisations and have conversations with lots of people, and from the work that we do that we really focus on equality, diversity, and inclusion, and we always ask employers if they've got an action plan and things like that. So, in terms of the action plans that you see, are there any things that irritate you about action plans, or are there any things that you would really want to see in an action plan that an employer has? Because they seem to have action plans around EDI, not just for our work with the Charter, but for lots of other things as well. And they should have one to try and make things better. But there must be some kind of bugbears that you have when you see them, and there must be some things that you think, thank goodness that's in that plan. It's good to see that as well.
Yeah. So I think my bugbear is when, my answer is two sides of the same coin, to be honest with you, Carol. A good action plan has thought critically about their community and their influence, where they have opportunities to affect the most meaningful change. Yeah. And a bad action plan hasn't done that. And it's just a bunch of tick boxes. I and you'll know this because I bring it up almost every technical panel meeting, I do get annoyed when people aren't thinking about all marginalized communities. They might say, okay, these are our stats for people of the global majority, and these are our stats for women. And I go, well, where are the trans people? Where are the LGBTQ plus people? Where are the disabled people? Right? Like, these are protected characteristics as well. What are you doing here?
But it's broader than just protected characteristics, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because society is much more complicated now.
You know what? And I'm a big advocate for organizations going above and beyond the Equality Act. And you can. That's fine. So thinking about, for example, class. Yes. Right? So, like, do you discriminate based off of somebody's accent, right? And being like, oh no, they're too working class to work in this fancy office.
Yeah. And you do hear of things like that happening.
Oh, of course, and it is discriminatory, right? Yeah. So, but it's not illegal, and so like which I think is really interesting in a country with so much classism. Like, I think that's really interesting. So, thinking about it, right? Like really putting that thought into it, and the way you think about it is to think, well, what is inclusion for?
Yeah.
Is it just so we can make more money? Is it just so we can have good press? Is it just so we can look good? It shouldn't be. It should be because we want to make our culture, our community, our society a better place for everybody. But we have to acknowledge that, like, the history of racism and colonialism and empire, the history of patriarchy and heteronormativity and ableism, like, they didn't just like suddenly disappear when we got the Equality Act. No. Like, these structures still exist in invisible ways. And if those things don't align with your value, they won't go away unless we do something about them on purpose. So we have to pay attention, and we have to do some active, intentional things to make things better for marginalized communities. We don't live in a fair, even playing field. We don't. And so, right now there's a really big rise in meritocracy and talking about meritocracy. So this idea that we should just hire people based off of merit, and that's it. Well, people come from different backgrounds. People have had different challenges.
Yes, that's right.
We're not showing up in the job interview on the same playing field.
No, that's right.
And that's why we have equity in place. And so if you ignore the way society exists, if you're going to sit there and pretend that racism isn't real and it doesn't exist anymore, then you're never going to address or tackle or solve racism. You're going to let it keep going. If not, you're going to let it get worse. These things exist, and we have to do something about them.
Yeah.
What are you doing about it? What is your organization doing about it?
Yeah.
It's not your fault, but as a member of the community, it's your responsibility.
Yeah. Have you come across any organizations that are being bold and being very brave? Have you come across things that are innovative that some organizations are doing to really push themselves forward? And what kind of things are you seeing?
Yeah, so for example, one of the charter clients, Tameside Council, they've expanded the equality protections in Tameside thanks to the All Equals Charter and the sort of feedback that I gave them. And so they've got multiple, like more protected characteristics in Tameside than anywhere else in the country, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. So like that's bold. That's, saying like as a local council, that's something that we can do and something that we will do. Another client of mine, they have an external supplier for, they work in e-commerce, and they have an external supplier for handling all of the sort of banking of their customers. But that external supplier had a form with one of two gender markers on it. And so they turned to their supplier and said, change your form, because our non-binary customers can't use it, so we can't get non-binary customers. And so this, it's a major bank. I won't name and shame, but it's a major bank has changed their form because
That's brilliant, isn't
right?
it?
And that's systemic change making.
Yes.
So it's about saying, where do we have influence? Let's influence.
Yeah.
Another customer of mine, a client of mine, they're a B2B organization. They have loads of customers that are businesses. They didn't have any policies in place for if their customers are bullying, harassing, or discriminating against their staff, what to do about it.
Yeah.
Now, thanks to the feedback I provided to the All Equals Charter, their staff get training not only in dealing with aggressive customers that are businesses, but also how to tackle hate crime.
Yeah.
And really take it that next step. And they're working on establishing a third-party hate crime reporting center. That's systemic change making. That matters, right?
Yeah.
And that's influence that they have.
Yeah. And it's about how we cascade that good practice.
Yep.
make sure other people are aware of it, so that, you know, maybe over time that might become a new norm within some of those kind of sectors as well, which would be fantastic to see.
Oh, absolutely. And that's how we create new norms in sectors. We talk a lot in EDI spaces, and I hate this term, but we talk about like best practice in EDI. Do better than best practice. You know, like innovate, role model, drive for a new best practice. And the way to do that, again, like I said, think about what change you can meaningfully make.
We've got there's lots of kind of noise around kind of equality, diversity and inclusion, and, you know, we are influenced by, you know, what we see around social media and you know, so many influences that we have on our lives now. What do you see as being kind of the kind of biggest challenges or the greatest opportunities that we might have over the coming years, you know, in the next 5 years or so, in terms of moving forward and being a more inclusive society? Are there any things that are on your radar in terms of those challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I'm really sad to say it, Carol, but I don't think we're becoming more inclusive right now. In fact, what I'm seeing is we're actually going backwards quite a great deal right now. Transphobia is like on a shocking level in the UK right now. So is anti-immigration sentiment and Islamophobia. Like, these are very serious issues in the UK right now. Gender-based violence has never been worse. Like, hate crimes are only going up. Like, things like I'm really quite concerned about the direction that.
And what do you think it is that's causing that? It's almost like a backward step, isn't it?
What I think is causing it is austerity. I think it's the cost of living crisis. I think it's a lack of access to services. And I think that's intentional. I think that when people are struggling, they
lash out.
They're pitted against one another. An easy example is the rise in like something called gender critical ideology. It's an anti-trans movement in the UK. And one of the key sort of like springboards for gender critical ideology is a lack of access to women's services. So austerity measures came in, loads of services got cut. We're talking services like like rape crisis support, domestic violence support, but also like food banks and like you know, support for mothers, things like that. And so those things get cut. There's very little of it now. People are fighting over resources. And when trans women need those spaces too, now it's trans women versus cis women fighting over the same resources, when really like who we should be angry at are the people who cut those services in the first place. And so I think, in my opinion, governments haven't been prioritizing the needs of the common people. Big corporations, like multi-billion pound corporations, aren't prioritizing the needs of the common people. And people are now suffering and struggling, and we're blaming different people. We're blaming each other. We're blaming immigration. We're blaming, trans people for whatever reason, rather than blaming billionaires, blaming corporate greed, blaming
looking at that bigger picture.
Where's the money? Follow the money? Where is it? And I think you'll see that it's not with the immigrants or the disabled or like marginalized communities.
So the vulnerable become more vulnerable. Don't they?
And that's historically a really common pattern, right? Like you can see it with Nazi Germany, like pre-Nazi Germany, right? The Germans were so poor, so poor. And then who got blamed? Jewish people, Roma people, queer people, like disabled people, like, and they went, and then there was a huge Holocaust, right? And like, but Jewish people weren't to blame for German poverty. Like that's a ridiculous position, right?
And we should be learning from all of these things that have happened historically, shouldn't we? And then changing things for the better.
But instead we're demonizing immigrants who are, and like not just immigrants, but asylum seekers, right? People who are fleeing for their lives from war-torn countries, a lot of which we supplied arms to. And so I think like there's a level of responsibility that we're not willing to take, or that at least our government isn't willing to take. And then fingers get pointed in the wrong direction.
But organisations can take responsibility on themselves, can't they, to make sure that they are looking at the other factors that affect people's lives.
Yep.
You know, we know from the work that we do, the impact of the cost of living that you mentioned before, the impact that can have on an individual. And we're quite lucky in that with our charter, you know, we do have a focus on health and well-being, and within that we've got employers that are talking about financial health and well-being as well, and looking at things to support individuals around cost of living. I think if employers are mindful of those kind of wider systemic influences, then, and they can build that into their strategies as well and their approaches to inclusion, then hopefully that they can take a little bit of responsibility and make some changes, perhaps in a small way. It's like that old saying about turning a tanker. But, you know, bit by bit, hopefully we can do our bit within our charter movement to help move things in a more positive direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that, like, is recognizing, like, businesses are struggling too.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, employers might really want to pay their staff more but can't afford it.
Yeah.
So why can't you afford it? Again, where's the money, right? So when we look at, like, for example, when we talk about the economy and growing the economy, the conversation right now is growth. Growth for who, right? Growth where? Growth how? Like, a lot of the leading economists that are driving government plans for economic growth are rich people, right? Like, leading economists are quite wealthy, right? Well, where's the working class perspective on the economy? Where are we looking for growth in clean air, in accessible services, in transportation, in housing? Where's the growth there, right? Building more houses isn't the answer. So we have loads of empty houses, and we have a lot of people experiencing homelessness, right? Like, it's ridiculous. So I think what organizations, when they're saying, well, we're struggling too as a business, as an organization, great. Write to your MP, you know, fundraise for local services, you know, start supporting your local community, because that's where you're going to see the difference.
Yeah. In terms of you and your kind of new ventures going forward, what are your immediate priorities going to be in terms of pushing forward with that exciting new opportunity that you have?
I want to get into as many spaces as I can.
Yeah.
People I've been doing some training on, like, how to start up your own thing. And people keep saying to me, like, well, who's your ideal customer? And I'm like, well, I'll work with anybody. And they're like, no, you can't say that, right? And I'm like, oh, my ideal customer is somebody who wants to make a difference.
Yeah.
And preferably, ideally, has some level of influence.
Yeah.
And they could have influence within their own workplace. You know, maybe they've got a leadership role somewhere, or they've got the ear of somebody with leadership. Maybe they have influence online. Maybe they've got a good social media following. Maybe they are part of a community group and, you know, have a good network there, whatever it might be. People have influence in all kinds of spaces. But people who want to do a difference, are willing to do a difference, make a difference, I want to meet them. And I think that's most people, actually. I think most people want to. They just don't know what to do. And I think there's an education piece there. Is a lot of people feel hopeless and helpless about making it, about the world. They wish they could make a difference. They feel like they can't make a difference. And they don't know that a coach could help them get there. Yeah. And so I think a big priority for me is that education piece and sort of helping people understand. You could do 6-7 sessions with me, sorting through, you know, your skills, your resources, your talents, what kind of change maker you are. There's different approaches, right? And figuring out, all right, what difference can you make? And now let's make an action plan to make it happen. That's realistic for you. That's suited for you. That's tailored for you. Well, yeah, that's for you, right? And it's not like, it's like so much of the time people think like, oh, I have to end racism or I have to stop climate change. No, what can you do? What can you actually do? Yeah. Right? Like,
don't make it too daunting. Yeah. And like you said, be realistic.
Be realistic.
Yeah.
But it's okay. But it's okay if you don't know how to figure that out on your own because you've not been taught how.
Yeah.
So it's okay to ask help.
Yeah.
It's okay to ask.
We all need help.
I definitely need help. So so ask for it.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. So I'm just conscious that we're coming to the kind of the end of our time, really, and I'm going to ask you a question that we always ask all of our guests, which is to tell me, is there one person, past or present, that you would absolutely love to have a coffee with, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would say Patrice Cullors.
Okay.
She is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
Queer feminist, Black woman, with an extraordinary amount of experience in social organizing, really influential. You know, the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 were the largest ever recorded civil rights movement ever.
Wow.
So, she was part of that.
Yeah.
And she's published like multiple books, and you know, she's really well regarded, but she's also survived so much. So I would love to I don't know, just ask her some questions, but also just listen to her story.
Yeah. I could tell that was a difficult decision for your choice in terms of who to have a coffee, because I can imagine there's quite a few people that you'd love to have a coffee.
I want to have coffee with Ian McKellen. I want to have coffee with you, Carol. There's so many people I want to have coffee with.
Well, we are going to have a coffee.
Good. And if you're listening here, buy me a coffee. I want to have coffee with you.
I think a coffee always makes things so much better. It's been absolutely brilliant having you on our podcast. I'm so glad that you came and had this conversation, and I know we're going to have several more conversations. It will never stop, and that we're going to continue to keep working with you as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for coming this afternoon.
I've had so much fun. This has been so great. Thank you for having me, Carol.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.